We have studied the markets where there is no role for the government. And now what we look at is examples of government interference in the market. Now consider the following. In every society you have rich and poor people, and all of us need some basic things like food, clothing, basic medicines, and so on. And if we let everything be determined by the market, it's entirely possible that certain goods become unaffordable for a section of the society, namely poor. Now, if this happens, the government sets in and sets what is called a price ceiling simply to make goods available to a certain section of the society. Another example of government interference, and these are all serious issues, is for example, if you are looking at sellers and whatever they sell, the market may not give them a price which will afford a decent level of living. And in this case, the government may step in and create what is called a price floor. And so in this lesson, what we'll look at the case of government interference when it is trying to help certain sections of the society, what concepts the government uses, and what are the consequences of that. So as a first step, let us look at the case of price ceiling. Now, what is price ceiling? The purpose of this is to make certain goods available to a class of consumers, namely poor, and some essential things like food, clothing, medicine, and so on. So in this case, what happens is the government steps in and sets a price of a product and tells the sellers, you can sell this product for a price lower than or equal to the one set by the government, but they can never charge a price higher than the one set by the government, and that is why it is called a price ceiling. You cannot go above this price. And if sellers do decide to sell it at a price higher than the one set by the government, it is considered illegal, and hence it is an offense, namely an economic offense. So some examples where you may find government stepping in is the case of food. It could be for basic clothing. It could be for basic medicines. Or it could be for rent. Now in the US, the best example of price ceiling is rent control. In certain urban cities, the government steps in and believes living in an apartment is unaffordable to a class of people, and the government steps in and sets a rent control, which is essentially a price ceiling. That is, the owners of this apartment can charge a rent lower than or equal to the one set by the government, but never a rent higher than the one set by the government. Now, let us look at all this in terms of a diagram. Now, we have this diagram in which there is no role for the government. We have a typical demand and supply curves, and we have equilibrium point, price at equilibrium, and quantity traded at equilibrium. Now, for some reason, the government believes that this price charged by the market or price at equilibrium is too high for a certain section of the society. So what government does is it sets a price ceiling at a price lower than the one charged by the market, and which is the equilibrium price. And see what happens if you set a price like this. What you will find is at this price lower than equilibrium, the quantity supplied by the sellers is lower than quantity demanded by consumers. So let us just write QS and QD. Or what we have is a situation of shortage. So just remember, whenever the government sets a price ceiling, chances are a shortage will develop for this market. What does a shortage mean? It simply means there will be some consumers who want this product and simply cannot get it in the market. Why? Because the quantity supplied is so low at this particular price. So whenever we have a price ceiling, just remember this, a shortage will ensue. Now let us look at some consequences of price ceiling. I've listed some important ones, and what you can do is you can list some other ones or think about some other ones. The first thing we have realized is whenever we have a price ceiling, a shortage will emerge. And whenever there's a shortage and you do need this good, what will happen is you may start going to the illegal market or the black market. So now when you have a shortage, you'll have an illegal market. You can buy this product, but outside the system, in a way you'll do it illegally. Now to enforce a price ceiling that has been set by the government, it is going to put more cops on the street. Now when the government puts more cops on the street, they'll have to enforce price ceiling, and it is entirely possible, it's just in the realm of possibilities, that we may be able to bribe the cops to get what we want, and so the corruption increases. This should be 5, so let me just change this to 5. And when the price is so low, there's a disincentive for sellers to improve quality and increase production. So these are some consequences and important ones of price ceiling. Now let us look at another example of government interference. And in this case, the government believes that the product or service that sellers are selling, the price afforded by the market or the price determined by the market will give them an income which is unaffordable to this class of sellers. And one of the examples that you can relate to is the case of minimum wages. If left to the market, chances are people may not earn even minimum wages. So the government steps in and sets a price floor of what is minimum wages. And that means you can earn wages which are equal to or greater than the minimum wages, but never wages lower than minimum wages. And you can find numerous examples of price floor in other fields as well. For example, in agriculture, different governments around the world use it to protect the interests of farmers. And in the case of US, it is wheat and corn. In the case of Japan, it is rice. And in the case of European Union, it is sugar. And similarly, you'll find other examples of price floor. So what is the definition of price floor? The government sets a price for a product and assures the sellers a minimum price for their product. This is also called minimum support price or minimum guaranteed price. And now what we do is we look at the consequences of a price floor in terms of a diagram. Now here we have this familiar diagram, and this is the equilibrium price. And for some reason the government believes that the price that is set or determined in the market will generate an income which may not make things affordable or afford a decent level of living to people. So the government steps in and sets a price floor. And price floor, as you would have noticed, will always be a price higher than the equilibrium price, otherwise the purpose is lost. And so let us extend this price to our demand and supply curves, and what we find is at this price, quantity demanded is less, quantity supplied is more. So let's just write this QD and QS. Or what we have when we have a price floor, is a case of surplus production, or what we have is a situation where supply exceeds demand, and so we are in this kind of a situation. So this is the first consequence of a price floor. And let us look at some other consequences of price floor. Now what has happened is the following. The market believes the sellers should sell less, but the government believes, for whatever reason, that the seller should receive a higher price for their product, and a consequence of that is that seller we get more and more of this product in the market. So essentially what the government is doing is, by setting a minimum support price or a price floor, is giving an incentive to sellers to produce more. Is it really a good way to do it? Look at another consequence. When the government sets a price higher than equilibrium, obviously consumers pay a higher price for this product. The most important question that comes to our mind when we are looking at price floor is, suppose the market price in fact falls below the one set by the government, and suppose we are looking at the case of wheat. And in such a case, to assure the farmers that minimum support price is effective, the government has to step in and buy that surplus. Just imagine if you're looking at the field of wheat and government ends up buying 10 or 20 million tons of wheat. What is government going to do with this amount of wheat? What it will do is, it will try to sell it in another market, because in your own country there's not enough demand at that particular price. Suppose in the world market there are no takers at the minimum support price. Now what government can do is either sell it at a loss, they receive a price lower than what they have paid their own farmers, and sometimes governments get into a situation where other countries just do not have the money to pay for wheat, and in such a case what governments do, and most of the developed countries do this, is give a lot of food aid. One of the reasons for giving food aid is of course humanitarian, which is for good purposes, but the second reason for this is the government ends up with so much surplus of food that it doesn't know what to do. In only one case that I know, the Australian government, which had gotten a lot of surplus of wheat, they tried to give it for free. There were no takers in the world to take that wheat, and so what did the Australian government do? It just burnt that amount of wheat. Now, whatever it is, whatever the government does with the surplus, in any case the government has to pay the farmers, so the government spending increases. Now when government spending increases, how does the government pay for this increased spending? They just tax citizens of their own countries. So citizens end up paying higher and higher taxes. So once again, these are some consequences of a price floor, and you should think about other consequences of a price floor. So what we have learned in this video is that the government can step in with good intentions, but then these actions undertaken by the government has a lot of bad consequences. And so economists have devised or tried to come out of this and devise different policies which the government can use. So you should think about all that. And this is the last video on market, and I hope you've enjoyed all the videos. Thank you for your time.